long do people need to keep feeding their bees?
Last year, you needed to keep feeding them all summer long. So the average year, I would have a feeder tray and be ready to feed them if you need to. You may not need to. These nukes, we've fed them probably 4 gallons of honey, all of these, since a month ago. They've got quite a bit of storage, and they've had good weather and pretty good nectar flow, so they've brought in quite a bit themselves. They should be ready to go. This is the advantage over buying nukes rather than packages. You don't have to do all that. So 4 gallons of sugar, if you went to the store and bought a $15 bag of 25 pounds and mixed that up and put that in there, you weren't saving a whole lot of money if you bought packages. So anyway, okay, sorry, where were we? Here and then here.
I was just wondering, how do you tell if it's a good nectar flow that year? Like, what makes the difference?
Okay, so I could tell there's some nectar flow on today. Just before the class began, it was kind of rush hour at the beehive. There's still quite a bit of activity going on, but you'll see when the plants that they are working on, the nectar kind of quits for the day on that plant, and so all the bees are coming home all at once. So you've got rush hour at the beehive. You look at it and think, uh-oh, maybe they're swarming or something. They're just all coming back at once, but they're still working now. So there's one indication you could kind of guess just by looking at a beehive. You don't even have to get in there. The best way would be to look in there. Let's say you were in the beehive and looked at the frames a week ago, and you noticed that this frame and this frame, there wasn't much. They were drawing out some wax on it, but there wasn't really any nectar in the cells. And then a few days later, a week later, whenever you looked in again, and they filled it up quite a bit. So you'd know that there's plants that are working. Another good way is just to be familiar with the nectar sources in your area, the plants that give nectar that bees use, that bees can collect it from, and watch for them. You look at a tree. Oh, the linden trees are going to be blooming here in about two to 3 more weeks. We know that linden trees is really good honey. The bees really like it. They'll be all over it. So if you have a colony that's next to some linden trees, you'll know there's a nectar flow. So there's lots of different ways. If you put syrup in there, you feed them some syrup, and they don't want it, there's probably a good nectar flow on. They're going for the good stuff instead of the junk food. So I recommend putting your feeder tray in. If you've got one, you should have one. Put in, just don't fill it up with a whole gallon. You may waste a gallon of syrup. But put a quart in there. See if the bees start picking it up. So now I've noticed when I install a package, the bees right away are going to be hungry. They're going to be drinking up the nectar right away, and they'll get to the point where they stop picking up the nectar at about 3 weeks or so. They don't need it anymore. You've fed them a lot and there's a honey flow on. They're really not using it up. Sometimes they slow down picking that up. They don't have any more room to expand the brood chamber anymore because there's a limited amount of bees and there's no new bees hatching out. So there's a point there where they quit picking up the nectar. And then as soon as the new bird, the first round of brood starts to emerge, then they've got a bunch more mouths to feed and they can expand it. So they start drawing out waxing. So then if there's feed in there, they start picking it up again, they start picking up speed, they start drawing out combs. So little signs like that, you'll know if the bees need feed, if they need food, they'll eat it if you give them some. If you gave bees all the different kinds of sugar, they prefer sucrose. And
so what's the best feed for them though? Tell me that first.
Right. So what you want to do is go get granulated sugar. Go to the grocery store, get you the 25-pound bag of table sugar, Western Family's sucrose, and mix that up with water. So it happens that sugar and water are the same weight. And so we don't need to get confused about, is this a measurement, this recipe you gave me, is this a volume measurement or a weight by weight measurement? It's the same. So when we say 1 to 1, you got 1 cup of water, 1 cup of sugar. 1 part water, 1 cup of granulated sugar. There's your 1 to 1 ratio. Mix it up until it's dissolved, and then put that in the feeder.
And these hot water?
These hot water, it'll dissolve quicker. If 1 to 1, it'll still dissolve if the water wasn't really hot. But if you're going to mix it thicker, then the water needs to be really warm. Warm the water up first before you mix the sugar. Otherwise, if you boil it after, you make caramel instead of beef.
Boiling water.
Boiling water.
Like so, the lights syrup for bees is like heavy syrup for canning, if that helps. Like in
So
the
now
fall.
2-to-1 mixture
Oh, yeah.
is what they recommend in the fall. 2 parts sugar, 1 part water. It's hard to get that to dissolve. It will, but you gotta have your water really hot and you gotta stir, 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 stir.
So in the fall, it's 2 parts
Yeah.
sugar to 1.
So the
and-
practical.
But now it would just be 1 to 1.
Yeah, so now the thinner, yeah, it simulates the nectar flows in the spring are a lot thinner. So, and the bees will pick it up quicker. The thinner the syrup, the more water in the syrup, the thinner it is, the quicker it'll ferment. If the bees don't eat it, and it's a warm temperature out, then it's going to ferment.
What kind of feeders do you like the best?
That's a good question. There's lots of different kinds of feeders, and the ones that I have are usually the most convenient for the beekeeper, but they're known to drown bees. So you need to make sure you have something in there if you're using these black type of inside division board feeders that replace the frame, that you have sufficient sticks in there or something for them to float, that can float in there so the bees can crawl out. Otherwise you drown bees. If you do it right, they work fine. Just make sure that you've got something in there for the bees to grab onto so they don't drown.
And I think they're the least expensive kind.
Yeah,
too,
they're-
right?
yeah,
What are
only
they called? The
$4.
side feeders or something?
In-tray.
Yeah.
In-tray feeders?
Yeah, division board feeders, what they're called.
They
If
replace
you need, we've got some for sale if you want one of those. They're $4 or so. You can buy a really expensive feeder that fits on the top. They make the kind that a quart jar will fit on, you put at the entrance. So just some kind of feeder. There's lots of different kinds.
Need to wait till the syrup's cool.
Yeah, wait. It's not a bad idea to put it when it's warm. You don't want it hot, but if it's warm, especially if you were feeding on a really cold spring day, you know, and which you may be, because it's cold out, the bees can't fly, and they're running out of food. You got to get some feed in there. If it's warm syrup, it'll help them warm the hive up, and they'll clean it up a lot quicker. So warm syrup is not a bad idea. So I was going to say though that the practical way that I feed bees, I probably mix mine up a little bit thicker than typically than you would in the spring, 1 to 1. I don't mix it as thick in the fall because it takes too much time to stir it up and you got to have the water too warm. So mine's about 2/3. So then it won't ferment as fast. If you mix it too thin, that means I've got to take another trip to the beehive to feed them sooner because they just picked it up quicker. And it increased the moisture, the humidity level in the hive because there's so much water in it. The bees got to spend more time drying it out and circulating air through the hive to dry it out if it's too thin. So I like to mix mine. I just kind of pick a place in the middle, and it works fine.
You shake all the bees off and then take the feeder somewhere else, fill it up, bring it back.
When after you're done with it?
No, when you're filling it up, you shake all the bees off, take a feeder.
No, if you've got a stick in there like you do in yours that floats, there'll be bees down in there. Just pour the syrup in, pour it up all the way up to the top, and the ones bees will just flow over the top, and they'll all clean each other up. If you've got the stick in there floating, if it goes all the way empty, sometimes the bees start sticking wax down in there, so your float in there doesn't come all the way up. Make sure it's loose, and then it comes to the top. The bees will crawl up on there, they'll get unstuck, crawl out, be just fine. You don't have to get the bees out first. Just pour the syrup in.
So ideal would be to feed them a frame of honey, but since we don't have that this year when you're starting out, then sugar water is like the second best choice.
Right. So next year save a frame of honey. Don't extract all of it. Leave plenty for your bees for the winter, and then you may even want to put one in the freezer or something, someplace where the ants and the earwigs and the wax moth and pests won't get to it. If you got a freezer, if you got enough freezer space, stick it in there.
And in the hierarchy of feeding, like honey's the best, then it's sucrose, then there's several sugars, and the very worst thing to feed bees is high fructose corn syrup. Just stay away from that. It's bad for them.
There's some sugars they don't want, they won't eat. Molasses, they won't touch it. There's other ones they don't like. So
Yeah, this is white
some
sugar.
beekeepers do order fructose by the truckload to feed their bees. They'll eat it, and they do okay, yeah, usually, but it's not the best for them.